The story of sensationalism begins in 1833 with the invention of the penny press. Before the penny press, papers were 6 cents, when the average worker was only making 85 cents a day, which made newspapers primarily for the wealthy elite. So Benjamin Day at the New York Sun invented the penny press to rapidly deliver newspapers to the everyday citizen, and for the first time he used newsboys to sell the papers for him. This, however, led to intense competition with all the emerging newspapers and led to the embellishment and often fabrication of stories to compete for sales. It was a game of who could get the best headline. And that's the famous tale between two journalists, Joseph Pulitzer and William Hearst. Pulitzer brought drama and style to journalism that previously has never been seen, and gave birth to the large headlines in newspapers you see today. Hearst, on the other hand, reported on the Cuban War, just like Pulitzer, but instead encouraged his reporters to exaggerate the severity of the war to make it interesting. This started the rivalry between Hearst and Pulitzer, as they kept trying to outdo each other with outlandish stories and stunts. This style of shocking, sensationalistic reporting came to be known as yellow journalism. Hearst was the publisher of the New York Journal, which makes him in part responsible for starting the Spanish-American War in 1898, all with a single headline: "Destruction of the warship Maine was the work of an enemy," which today we realize was not the work of the enemy, and not the Spanish, but journalists flooded the story anyway because it sold papers, and it got around by just asking naval officers what their thoughts were on it, rather than actual facts from them. And then he went even further by using inflammatory language to get the reader upset deliberately. What you're watching is a short film from 1942 called The Newsreel. They were a documentary film that contained selected news stories and topics of interest that were played at movie theaters.
The armaments of war that an embattled world must have if democracy is to survive.
Newsreels were a source of current affairs that informed millions of people from the 1910s to the 1950s. This was revolutionary at the time because it was in an era before 24-hour news on television. This was able to introduce news footage to a massive audience. Although these weekly reels contain 3 to 4 hand-picked stories by the companies who made them, this opens the door to what's known as agenda-setting theory. Agenda-setting theory is where issues are portrayed as important in the news media and become important to the public because of it. And this theory is more important than ever in today's world. When you're watching this now, it might seem like old, antiquated newsreels, but if you fast forward and add technology, media conglomerates have been able to do what the newsreels did, and even Hearst did with his newspaper with a singular voice. And there's only one way to do this, and it's to harness hundreds of local stations to be one giant microphone.
Media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets.
What you're listening to now is a script sent out by Sinclair Broadcasting, arguably one of the most powerful U.S. media conglomerates. And they're using their platform as a microphone.
And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous.
If democracy is to survive, be ready to defend democracy if necessary.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 So Sinclair is not that well known, but it owns 193 local TV stations across the US and covers 71.8% of viewers nationwide. Now, if this is a problem, what if news organizations were in a race to get out the best and fastest breaking news they possibly could?
A border town bombarded by Turkey's military. This video, obtained by ABC News, appears to show the fury of the Turkish attack on the border town of Tel Aviv. This video right here appearing to show Turkey's military bombing Kurd civilians in a Syrian border town. The Kurds, who fought alongside the U.S. against ISIS. Now, horrific reports of atrocities committed by Turkish-backed fighters on those very allies.
A Kurdish border town? I didn't know Kentucky was in Syria. Whether this was deliberate or a mistake, it's still worrying that a main-level news organization did this. And to make matters worse, look at their retraction. They showed fake footage and said Kurdish civilians were being bombed by another country, which is a war crime. And all they said to date was, ABC News regrets the error. And If barely anyone heard about it, it leads to an increased hysteria about Syria.
Swipe at Kurdish allies, abandoned by the U.S. and under a brutal Turkish
So the
attack.
final thought is a question, not of whether ABC is fake news or is nightly news encouraging the U.S. to go to war with Syria, but these mistakes happen all the time. Dan Rather and Brian Williams got fired because of exaggerating stories, and at the time, the entire station went to their rescue. Brian Williams lied for years about being in a helicopter that was shot down by an RPG, even said there was dead bodies floating in the water after Hurricane Katrina, which wasn't true. And these guys are good journalists, but every once in a while, things slip through the cracks. So the question is, are you just watching a newsreel from 1942? It can be more dangerous than ever because agenda setting is at the hands of the media conglomerates using their microphones. So it falls on you, the viewer, to be media literate. So the answer is to be media literate. Watch the news you love, watch the news you hate, forge your own opinion with facts, and don't forge it with speculation and reports. And lastly, do not be sold the news.